The ship was small. Everyone in the docking bay could see that. Among the massive cruisers of the Valari and the armored warships of the Dreadnought, the human vessel looked like a lost child wandering into a room full of giants. It was gray, simple, and carried no weapons worth mentioning. The name painted on its side read, "The Perseverance," and the aliens who saw it thought that name was funny. Inside the ship, Captain Han Doyu stood at the bridge window and looked out at the Grand Hall of the Galactic Council. It was not a building, it was the size of a small moon, a floating structure made of crystal and light, spinning slowly in the orbit of the Valari homeworld. Thousands of ships moved around it, like fish around a reef. Doyu had spent his whole life looking at the stars, but nothing had prepared him for this. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said Yoon Nori from behind him. She was the chief science officer, a thin woman with sharp eyes and a habit of smiling when things got difficult. She was already running scans on everything she could see. Her fingers moved fast across her tablet, recording data, pulling signals, and saving every bit of information the Council's open networks were broadcasting. "It's big," Doyu said. "Big things like to remind you that you're small." "Then let's make sure we remember why we came," said a quiet voice near the door. Baek Jisek walked onto the bridge. He was Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council, a man chosen not for his loudness, but for his patience. He was average in height, average in build, and completely unremarkable in appearance. But his eyes were calm in a way that made people pay attention. He wore a simple dark suit, no medals, no decorations, just a small pin of the Earth on his collar. "Are you ready?" Doyu asked him. "I've been ready for 6 months," Jisek said. "The question is whether they're ready for us." They were not. The delegation entered the Grand Hall through a corridor so wide that 10 ships could fly through it side by side. The walls glowed with a soft golden light, and the air smelled like something between rain and flowers. Alien species of every shape and size filled the hallways. Some floated, some crawled, some walked on legs that numbered in the dozens. None of them looked at the humans. They were invisible here, beneath notice, too new and too small to matter. The council chamber itself was a massive dome. Hundreds of seats rose in circles around a central platform, each one designed for a different species. The Valari sat at the highest level, glowing softly like living stars. The Dreadnought were below them, their dark armor clicking as they shifted. The Ilwe floated in tanks of shimmering water, their tentacles drifting lazily. The Gorath sat like mountains, silent and still. Jisok walked to the central platform. His footsteps echoed in the enormous space. He looked up at the assembled races, some of whom had been traveling between stars before humans had learned to make fire, and he bowed. "My name is Baek Jisok," he said. His voice was steady. "I speak for Earth and for the people of humanity. We have come a long way to stand here today, and we are grateful for this chance to speak." He paused and looked around the chamber. "We are young, we know this. Our history is short, and our journey to the stars has only just begun. But we believe that every voice matters, no matter how new. We come to this council with respect, with humility, and with a simple request: to join you, to trade with you, to learn from you, and perhaps in time to offer something of our own." He bowed again and waited. For a moment, there was silence. Then the Valari High Speaker, a being made of pale blue light, leaned forward from the highest seat. "How old is your species?" the High Speaker asked. "Roughly 300,000 years, Jisok answered. A ripple of amusement moved through the chamber. The Valari were over 2 million years old. "And how long have you traveled between stars?" the High Speaker continued. 11 years. This time, the laughter was not a ripple, it was a wave. The Dreadnought representative made a sharp clicking sound that their translators identified as deep amusement. The Ilway projected a feeling of pity and humor that washed over the chamber like a cold breeze. Even the Gorath, beings who rarely showed emotion, shifted in what looked like a slow, rumbling chuckle. The High Speaker raised a hand, and the laughter faded. "Young species," the High Speaker said, "you are not ready. Your kind was fighting wars over patches of soil less than 3 centuries ago. You have barely learned to leave your own world. Come back in a few thousand years, when you have matured." More laughter. Someone in the upper rows called out something that the translator turned into carbon toys. The Drenok representative pointed one of its massive claws at the human delegation and said, "Your ship looks like something our children would build for fun." Gsok stood still through all of it. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He did not clench his fists. He simply listened, and when the noise died down, he bowed one more time. "Thank you for your time," he said. "We will remember this." Nobody noticed the weight in those words. On the walk back to the ship, Doyu said nothing for a long time. His jaw was tight. Nari walked beside him, her tablet clutched to her chest, her face unreadable. "So," Doyu finally said as the airlock closed behind them, "what now?" Gsok sat down in the nearest chair and loosened his collar. He looked tired, but there was something in his eyes that had not been there before. A spark, a decision. "Now," Gsok said, "we learn everything." Doyu frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean they left their doors open." Gsok looked at Nari. "Tell me you got it." Nari allowed herself a small smile. She held up her tablet. On the screen were thousands of files, still downloading, centuries of alien science, technology, history, and research, all taken from the Council's open public networks. Nobody had thought to restrict access for a species they considered irrelevant. "Every archive they made public," Nari said. "Everything they didn't think was worth protecting from us. Star maps, engineering blueprints, energy research, medical science, all of it." Gsok leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. "They laughed at us," he said softly. "Let them. We have work to do." The Perseverance turned away from the Grand Hall and began its long journey home. Behind it, the great structure of the Council glowed like a jewel in the darkness of space. Inside it, 40 civilizations had already forgotten the name of the small gray ship and the quiet man who had stood before them. 10 years is nothing to the galaxy. The Volari measured time in ages. The Gorath counted centuries the way humans counted days. The Drenok planned military campaigns that lasted generations. To the Galactic Council, 10 years was a blink, barely enough time to finish a single debate about trade routes. But to humans, 10 years was everything. Nari did not sleep much during the first year. She led a team of 400 scientists from 32 countries, all of them locked inside a research facility buried deep under the mountains of Gangwon Province. The facility had no name. It did not exist on any public record. The people who worked there simply called it the basement. Every day, Nari and her team went through the data she had taken from the Council's open archives. There were millions of files, research papers, engineering designs, energy models, biological studies, and star maps that covered regions of space humanity had never seen. The amount of knowledge was staggering, and at first it felt impossible. These were sciences developed by civilizations millions of years old. How could humans hope to understand any of it? But Nari noticed something strange. The alien races were specialists. Each one had gone deep into a single field and mastered it beyond anything humans could imagine. The Volari understood energy. The Drenok understood materials and weapons. The Ilway understood biology and the mind. The Gorath understood minerals and heavy industry. But none of them had combined their knowledge. They kept their sciences separate, guarded, and isolated. In 12,000 years of the Council's existence, No one had ever mixed the ingredients together. Humans were different. Humans were messy. They borrowed, copied, mixed, and broke things until something new appeared. Nari realized that the Council's greatest weakness was not a lack of knowledge, it was a lack of imagination. She started cross-referencing everything. Valari energy theory combined with Drenok metallurgy. Ilway neural mapping applied to computer systems. Gorath mineral science used to create new building materials. The results were like nothing anyone had ever seen. New alloys, new engines, new ways to generate and store power. Things that no single alien race would have thought to build, because it would have required them to think outside their own field. In the third year, a young engineer named Shin Taeho arrived at the basement. He was 26 years old, quiet, and had a habit of staring at things for hours before suddenly building something incredible. Nari gave him the Drenok's famous hull alloy, a material the insectoid race had used for over 100,000 years and considered perfect and unbreakable. Taeho studied it for 2 weeks. Then he took it apart at the molecular level, rebuilt it using principles borrowed from Gorath crystal science, and created a new version that was 30% lighter and twice as strong. It took him 18 months from start to finish. The Drenok had spent 100,000 years never thinking to improve it. When Nari showed the results to Ambassador Baek Ji-suk, he simply nodded and said, "Good, now build a fleet." That job went to Cho Eun-ji. She was a military commander with a reputation for being impossibly calm during battle and impossibly demanding outside of it. She was given command of the newly formed United Earth Defense Fleet, and she took the job with a single condition. She would build the fleet her way, and no politician would tell her how. Eun-ji did not copy alien warships. She studied them, understood their strengths, and then designed something completely different. Human ships were smaller and faster. They were modular, meaning they could be reconfigured in the middle of a fight. They carried weapons that mixed Valari energy technology with human targeting systems. And they were networked. Every ship in the fleet shared data in real time, so they could think and react as one. She built 200 warships in 7 years. She trained their crews, not just in combat, but in adaptation. The first rule she taught every officer was simple. No plan survives contact with the enemy, so learn to make new plans faster than they can react. While Yoonji built the fleet and Nari pushed the boundaries of science, Ji-seok was doing something quieter but equally important. He was making friends. Across the galaxy, there were hundreds of smaller species who had been dismissed, exploited, or simply ignored by the Council. They were too weak to fight back, too small to matter, and too poor to bribe their way into the Council's favor. Ji-seok reached out to them one by one, through hidden channels and encrypted messages. He offered them something no one had ever offered before. A fair deal. Technology in exchange for friendship. Protection in exchange for trust. Trade agreements where both sides benefited equally. It was so simple that most of the smaller species were suspicious at first. In the galaxy they knew, no one gave without taking. But Ji-seok was patient. He answered every question. He kept every promise. And slowly, a shadow alliance began to form. Dozens of small civilizations, scattered across the outer edges of the galaxy, all quietly connected to Earth. The Council noticed nothing. They were too busy with their own problems. The Valari and the Drenok were fighting over territorial rights in the mid-rim sectors. The Ilway were playing both sides, as they always did. The Gorath had withdrawn into their mines and factories, uninterested in politics. Nobody was watching the small gray planet in the unfashionable corner of the galaxy. In the 8th year, a Valari scout ship stumbled upon one of Earth's deep space outposts. It was a small station, hidden in an asteroid belt in unclaimed space. The scout captain scanned it and was confused. The technology did not match anything in the Council's database. It was advanced, more advanced than it should be, for a species that had been laughed out of the Council a decade ago. The scouts sent a report to the Volari Intelligence Division. It was filed, stamped, and placed in a folder that no one would read for another 2 years. The note attached to it said, "The short-lifers appear to be building things in unclaimed space. No threat assessment necessary." That was the last time anyone would underestimate humanity. Back on Earth, Han Do-yu stood on the bridge of a brand-new warship. It was sleek, dark, and fast. The name on its hull read, Iron Orchid. "She's beautiful," Do-yu said. Yoonji stood beside him, arms crossed, her face showing nothing. "She's not meant to be beautiful," Yoonji said. "She's meant to make a point." Do-yu smiled. "And what point is that?" Yoonji looked out the window at the fleet. 200 ships, hanging in formation like a wall of iron stars. "That, we are done being laughed at." In a small office in Seoul, Baek Ji-seok sat alone, reading a message from one of his allies in the Outer Rim. The Dreadnought were moving. 3 independent star systems were about to be invaded. Millions of lives were at stake. He closed the message, folded his hands, and thought for a very long time. Then he picked up his communicator and called Do-yu. The 3 star systems on the Outer Rim were called the Rimward 3. They were small, quiet, and unimportant by galactic standards. 2 of them were home to species that had never developed faster-than-light travel on their own. The 3rd was a colony of the Feni, a gentle, 4-armed species that had been farming the same peaceful world for 6,000 years. None of them had armies. None of them had warships. None of them had ever hurt anyone. The Dreadnought took the first system in 9 hours. Their warships dropped out of hyperspace like a swarm of black insects, surrounded the planet, and sent a single message: surrender or die. The inhabitants surrendered. The Dreadnought landed troops, seized every resource facility, and raised their flag. It was clean, fast, and brutal. The second system fell even faster. The Dreadnought commander, a veteran named Vor, did not even bother with a warning. His fleet simply arrived and began occupying. No one resisted. There was no point. The Galactic Council held an emergency debate. The Volari High Speaker condemned the invasion with strong words and no action. The Ilway offered to mediate, which everyone knew meant nothing. The Gorath said nothing at all. 17 smaller species begged for help. They were told to be patient. They were told the Council would find a diplomatic solution. No solution came. On the bridge of the Iron Orchid, Han Do-yu read the reports and felt something cold settle in his chest. He had seen this before, not in space but in human history. The strong taking from the weak, while the powerful watched and did nothing. Some things, it seemed, were universal. "Fleet is ready," Cho Eun-ji said from the tactical station. She stood straight, her hands behind her back, her voice flat and calm. Behind her, a wall of screens showed the positions of every ship in the United Earth Defense Fleet. 200 warships, 60,000 crew members, all of them, waiting for one word. "Nari, what do we know about their fleet?" Do-yu asked. Yoon Nari pulled up the data. Vor has 42 warships in the Rimward sector. Standard Dreadnought heavy cruisers. Thick armor, powerful forward cannons, slow turning speed. They fight in a straight line. Charge forward, hit hard, overwhelm with size. They've been fighting this way for 100,000 years. "Because it always works," Do-yu said. "It always worked," Eun-ji corrected. Past tense. Do-yu looked at her. She did not smile, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet fire that had been burning for 10 years. "Take us in," Do-yu said. The Iron Orchid and 6 destroyers jumped to the Rimward 3. They dropped out of hyperspace, directly between the Dreadnought fleet and the 3rd system, the Feni homeworld, the last one still free. Do-yu opened a channel on all frequencies. "This is Captain Han Do-yu of the United Earth Defense Fleet. The systems and the people of the Rimward 3 are under our protection. You have 12 hours to withdraw all forces. This is not a request. The message traveled across the sector at the speed of light. It reached Vor's flagship in seconds. Vor was old, even for a Drenok. He had fought in 17 campaigns and had never lost. His body was covered in scars and metals, and his mandibles were chipped from decades of combat. When he heard the human transmission, he made a sound that his crew recognized as deep, genuine laughter. 7 ships, Vor said. They brought 7 ships. He sent 40 warships. The Battle of the Rimward 3 began at 0600 Galactic Standard Time. Vor's fleet advanced in their traditional formation, a wall of heavy cruisers, shoulder to shoulder, cannons forward, moving like a fist. They expected the humans to run, or to fight in the same way every species in the galaxy fought, line against line, strength against strength. The humans did neither. Yunji's voice was calm on the command channel. All ships execute pattern falling leaves. The 7 human ships scattered. They broke apart like seeds in the wind, moving in seemingly random directions. The Drenok formation hesitated. Their targeting systems tried to lock on, but the human ships were too fast and too unpredictable. They darted between the larger cruisers, never staying in one place for more than a few seconds. Then the first strikes came. Small, precise, surgical. The human ships targeted engines, communication arrays, and sensor clusters. They did not try to destroy the Drenok ships. They blinded them. One by one, the massive cruisers lost their eyes and ears. They fired their cannons in every direction, hitting nothing but empty space, and sometimes each other. They are fighting like insects, Vor snarled. Pin them down. But every time the Drenok adjusted, the humans changed again. Unji shifted formations every 4 minutes. She used decoys, small drones that projected false signatures. She jammed communications so the Drenok ships could not coordinate. She sent false orders on Drenok frequencies, causing 3 of their cruisers to break formation and crash into each other's firing lines. In the 3rd hour, Unji revealed her second weapon. The destroyers regrouped and hit the Drenok fleet from below, a direction their heavy armor did not cover. The Drenok had built their ships to face enemies head-on, because that was how war had always been fought. No one had ever thought to attack from underneath. The Drenok's main cannons, weapons designed to crack open fortified stations, hit the human destroyers and did less damage than expected. The new alloy absorbed and dispersed the energy in ways the Drenok engineers could not understand. By the 5th hour, Vor's fleet was in chaos. 12 ships were disabled, drifting without power. 8 more were badly damaged. 5 had been destroyed outright. The rest were scattered, their formations broken, their communications jammed, their crews confused and afraid. Vor himself was wounded. A human torpedo had struck his flagship's bridge, killing half his command staff. He sat in his chair, green blood dripping from a wound on his head, and stared at the tactical display. His entire fleet was being taken apart by 7 ships. 7 ships. In the 6th hour, Yunji gave the final order. The human fleet regrouped and delivered a coordinated strike that disabled Vor's flagship and the remaining cruisers around it. The battle was over. The final count. 31 Drenok warships destroyed or disabled. Earth lost 2 destroyers and 1 frigate. The surviving crew of the lost ships had been evacuated before the vessels went down. Unji had planned for that too. Vor sat in the wreckage of his bridge and recorded a single transmission. His voice was quiet, stripped of all pride. This is Commander Vor of the Drenok 3rd Fleet. I am sending this to the Galactic Council and to all who will listen. The humans, they do not fight like us. They do not fight like anyone. They change their tactics in the middle of battle. They attack from directions that should not exist. They use tricks that no honorable warrior would consider, and they do it faster than we can respond. He paused, his mandibles clicking slowly. I have fought for 60 years. I have faced every species in this galaxy, but I have never faced anything like this. They do not follow the rules of war. They invent new ones while they are fighting. He closed the channel. Across the galaxy, every species with a receiver heard that message. In the council chamber, the Valari High Speaker listened and said nothing. On 100 worlds, military commanders replayed the battle footage and tried to understand what they were seeing. On the bridge of the Iron Orchid, Doyu let out a breath he had been holding for 6 hours. Around him, his crew was cheering. Unji did not cheer. She stood at her station, watching the tactical display, already planning for what came next. This is just the beginning, she said quietly. On the Feni homeworld below, 4 billion people looked up at the sky and saw the strange dark ships that had saved them. They did not know what humans were, but they would never forget this day, and they would never forget the species that came to help when no one else would. The galaxy had laughed at humans once. Nobody was laughing now. The battle footage spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Every species, every world, every military command center watched the same 6 hours of recording over and over again. They watched 7 human ships tear apart a fleet of 40. They watched formations that no tactical computer could predict. They watched weapons that should not exist, fired from ships that should not be that fast, by a species that should not be that dangerous. The Galactic Council called an emergency session. It was only the 9th emergency session in 4,000 years. The Grand Hall was full. Every seat was taken. Species that had not attended a council meeting in centuries sent representatives. The air was thick with tension, and the usual background noise of casual conversation was completely absent. For the first time in living memory, the chamber was quiet before the session even began. The Valari High Speaker opened the session with a single question. How did this happen? No one answered. The Drenok delegation was smaller than usual. Their military pride had been shattered, and the representatives who did attend sat in rigid silence, their armor dull, their mandibles still. They had nothing to say. Commander Vor's transmission had already said everything. The Valari intelligence chief presented a report. It was supposed to explain how humanity had grown so powerful so quickly. Instead, it revealed how badly the Council had failed to pay attention. Earth's population was 8 billion. By galactic standards, that was tiny. The Drenok homeworld alone held over 100 billion. But human industrial output had grown by 900% in 10 years. Their fleet had expanded from 0 to over 200 warships. Their technology, which had been borrowed from Council archives, had evolved into something the report described as unrecognizable and deeply concerning. The intelligence chief listed the things humans had built. Engines faster than anything the Valari had designed. Hull armor stronger than Drenok alloys. Communication systems that could not be jammed. Sensor arrays that could see through cloaking fields. And medical technology that had extended the average human lifespan by 30 years in a single decade. But the most alarming part of the report was not about technology. It was about politics. Humanity had allies, dozens of them. Small species from the Outer Rim, species the Council had ignored or exploited for centuries, had formed quiet agreements with Earth. They shared resources, intelligence, and strategic positions. Together, they covered nearly a third of the galaxy's outer territories. And they were loyal, not because humans had threatened them, but because humans had helped them. The High Speaker asked the intelligence chief how long this had been happening. Since the day their ambassador left this chamber 11 years ago, the chief said. Since the first day. The chamber went even quieter. Then the doors of the grand hall opened, and Bake Jisok walked in. He looked older than he had 11 years ago. His hair was graying at the sides, and there were lines around his eyes that had not been there before. But he walked with the same steady, unhurried pace. He wore the same simple dark suit, the same small earth pin on his collar. He carried nothing. No tablet, no documents, no weapons. He walked to the central platform, the same platform where he had stood 11 years ago and been laughed at. He looked up at the assembled council and waited until every eye, every sensor, and every telepathic presence was focused on him. Then he spoke. 11 years ago, I stood in this exact spot and asked to join you. I was polite, I was respectful. I asked for nothing more than a chance, and you laughed. His voice was calm. There was no anger in it, no bitterness, just a simple statement of fact. You told us we were too young, too primitive, too small. You told us to come back in a few thousand years when we had matured. And we accepted that answer. We went home. He paused. But we did not sit still. We studied, we learned, we built, and while you laughed and forgot about us, we grew into something you did not expect. The silence in the chamber was absolute. Not a click, not a ripple, not a breath. I am not here to ask for membership. We do not want it. I am not here to threaten you. We are not your enemy. I am here to inform you of a simple fact. He looked directly at the Valari High Speaker. The systems you abandoned, the people you ignored, the species you treated as worthless, they are under our protection now. Every single one of them. They asked for your help, and you did nothing. They asked for our help, and we answered. He let that settle for a moment. You may continue to govern yourselves however you wish. We have no interest in ruling your worlds or controlling your politics. But the era in which the strong take from the weak, while this council watches and does nothing, that era is over. From this day forward, if anyone in this galaxy calls for help, they will receive it. That is not a threat. It is a promise. He bowed, the same polite, deep bow he had given 11 years ago, and turned to leave. No one stopped him. No one spoke. No one laughed. The doors closed behind him, and the grand hall sat in a silence that lasted for almost 10 minutes before anyone dared to speak. What followed was not a war. It was something slower and more painful, a collapse. The Drenok were the first to break. Humiliated by their defeat and terrified of what the human fleet could do at full strength, they quietly withdrew from council politics. Within 6 months, their ambassador approached Earth through a back channel and requested a non-aggression pact. Unji recommended accepting it. Jisok agreed. The pact was signed in secret, and the Drenok began dismantling their forward military bases near human-allied space. The Ilway tried a different approach. They were telepaths, and they believed they could infiltrate human leadership by reading their minds. A team of their best psychic agents was sent to Earth. They failed completely. Yun-Nari had anticipated this. Using the Ilway's own research on neural patterns, research she had downloaded from the Council's public archives years ago, she had developed psionic shielding. Human leaders, military commanders, and diplomats all carried small devices that blocked telepathic intrusion. The Ilway agents returned home with nothing. The shock within the Ilway government was immense. Their greatest advantage, the power they had used to manipulate galactic politics for thousands of years, was useless against humans. The Gorath, as always, were practical. They had no interest in pride or politics. They wanted profit. When human trade ships arrived at their borders offering fair prices for raw materials, prices better than what the Council offered, the Gorath did not hesitate. They opened their markets to Earth and bypassed Council trade tariffs entirely. Within a year, The Gorath were making more profit from human trade than they had made from the Council in the previous century. The Valari watched all of this and understood what was happening. Their control over the galaxy, a control that had lasted for 12,000 years, was dissolving. Not through war, not through conquest, but through something far more dangerous: irrelevance. Species were leaving the Council. Not dramatically, not with announcements or protests. They simply stopped coming to sessions. They stopped paying tribute. They stopped asking for permission. One by one they turned toward Earth and its growing network of allies, and they found something the Council had never offered them: respect. The Valari High Speakers sat alone in the darkened Grand Hall late one night. The enormous chamber was empty. The seats were dark. The only light came from the High Speaker's own glowing body, a pale blue shimmer in the vast darkness. An aide entered quietly. "High Speaker, I have the analysis you requested. Tell me, the human alliance now includes 63 species. Their combined fleet numbers over 400 warships. Their economic output has surpassed our own." The High Speaker was quiet for a long time. "How long have they been planning this?" the High Speaker asked. The aide checked the records. "Since the day their ambassador left this chamber, High Speaker. Since the very first day." The pale blue light flickered once, and the Grand Hall fell into darkness. 7 years had passed since the Battle of the Rimward III, and the galaxy was a different place. Not broken, not conquered, just changed, slowly and deeply, in ways that no one had predicted, least of all the humans who had started it all. The Galactic Council still existed. Its Grand Hall still floated in orbit around the Valari homeworld, still glowing with golden light, still enormous and beautiful. But the seats inside were mostly empty now. Sessions that once drew hundreds of representatives now attracted a few dozen. The debates that once shaped the destiny of 1,000 worlds now echoed in hollow chambers, where dust gathered on alien chairs. The Council had not been destroyed. It had simply become unnecessary. In its place something new had grown. They called it the Terran Cooperative Accord, though the name was slightly misleading. It was not just about Earth. It was about everyone. Bake G-Sock had designed it carefully, drawing on every mistake the old Council had made. Where the Council had been built on hierarchy, the Accord was built on equality. Where the Council gave power based on age and military strength, the Accord gave every species one voice, regardless of how old they were, how big their fleet was, or how long they had been traveling the stars. It was not perfect. No system involving hundreds of different species could be perfect. There were arguments, disagreements, and long nights of difficult negotiation. But there was one rule that G-Sock had insisted on from the very beginning, and it was the rule that held everything together. No one gets left behind. If a species needed help, they got help. If a world was in danger, someone came. If a people were hungry, food was shared. It was such a simple idea that the older races found it almost childish. But it worked. Because behind the simplicity was something powerful. And trust, G-Sec had learned, was the one thing the old Council had never bothered to build. Han Doyu was an admiral now. His hair was more gray than black, and his face carried the weight of years spent making difficult decisions. He commanded the peacekeeping fleet from the bridge of the Iron Orchid, which had been refitted and upgraded so many times that only the name remained from the original ship. His fleet patrolled the former conflict zones, the border regions where the Drenok had once taken what they wanted, where pirates had once preyed on the weak, where species had lived in fear for generations. He was respected everywhere he went, not because humanity was the strongest force in the galaxy, though by now they probably were, but because Doyu had proven something rare. He had shown that power could be used gently. His fleet had fought only when fighting was the last option. They had saved more lives through negotiation aid, and presence than they had through weapons. And every species that had been protected by his ships remembered it. Nari had built something she was even more proud of than her early research breakthroughs. She called it the Open Knowledge Initiative, and it was the largest scientific collaboration in galactic history. Every species that joined the Accord shared their research freely. Discoveries that would have taken centuries under the old system of hoarded secrets and restricted access now happened in years. A cure for a disease that had killed millions of Feni was developed in 8 months by a team that included human biologists, Ilway neuroscientists, and Gorath chemists. A new form of clean energy was created by combining Valari physics with engineering principles from a species so small that no one in the old council had known their name. Nari ran the initiative from a space station she had designed herself. A sprawling structure filled with laboratories, libraries, and meeting rooms where beings from every corner of the galaxy worked side by side. She was older now, her hair streaked with white, but her eyes still carried that sharp, curious light. She still smiled when things got difficult, and things still got difficult every day. But that was the point. The hard problems were the ones worth solving. Shin Taeho had become the most famous engineer in the galaxy, though he still did not enjoy talking to people about it. He had built a network of transit gates, massive structures that allowed instant travel between distant regions of space. Systems that had been isolated for thousands of years were now connected. Species that had never met before could now trade, communicate, and visit each other. The galaxy, which had always been impossibly large, suddenly felt smaller. Taeho spent most of his time in his workshop, surrounded by blueprints and prototypes, talking quietly to his team and occasionally forgetting to eat. He was happy. Cho Eunji had not softened with age. She still stood straight, still spoke in that flat, calm voice, and still made every officer under her command slightly nervous. But her mission had changed. She no longer built a fleet for war. She built a force for peace. Her joint species military units were the first of their kind. Human officers served alongside Drenok soldiers. Feni navigators worked with Gorath engineers. Ilway tacticians coordinated with species they had once manipulated. It was messy, difficult, and sometimes absurd. But Eunji made it work, because she believed that people who fought together learned to trust each other. And she was right. She still kept Earth's defenses strong. She upgraded the fleet, trained new recruits, and ran drills that kept her commanders sharp. When asked why she maintained such readiness during a time of peace, she always gave the same answer. Peace is not the absence of danger, it's the presence of those willing to defend it. And Baek Jusok? He had retired. He lived in a small house on the eastern coast of Korea, near the town where he had grown up. The house was simple, wood and stone, with a garden in the back and a view of the sea from the front porch. He grew vegetables. He read books. He took long walks along the shore in the early morning, when the world was quiet and the sky was turning from dark to gold. One afternoon, a journalist came to visit him. She was young, eager, and clearly nervous about interviewing the man who many considered the most important human in history. She sat across from him at his kitchen table, recorder on, notebook open, and asked the question that everyone wanted answered. Ambassador Baek, how did humanity go from being laughed out of the Galactic Council to leading the largest alliance in the galaxy? Jisok poured her tea. He thought about the question for a while, the way he always thought about things, carefully, patiently, without rushing. We didn't lead, he said. We listened. That's different. The journalist waited for more. When we went to the council the first time, they told us we were too young, too small, too fragile. And honestly, they were right. We were all of those things. But they made a mistake. They thought those things were weaknesses. He sipped his tea. Fragile things learn to be careful. Small things learn to be clever. And young things, he paused and smiled. the first real smile the journalist had seen from him. Young things grow. The journalist wrote that down and asked one more question. Do you have any regrets? Jisok looked out the window at the sea. The sunlight was warm on his face. I wish it hadn't taken so long, he said. I wish we could have helped sooner. But no regrets. We did the best we could with what we had. And I think we did all right. Far away, on the edge of explored space, a small ship appeared. It was battered and old, its hull scarred by years of travel. Inside it were beings that no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. A new species, making first contact for the very first time. They were afraid. Their transmissions were shaky, uncertain, full of the kind of fear that comes from not knowing if the universe is friendly or hostile. They had heard stories, old stories, carried on stray signals across the void, about a galaxy ruled by ancient races that looked down on the young and the small. The nearest outpost was human. A young officer named Quan Yuri picked up the transmission. She was 24 years old, fresh out of the academy, and this was her first week on duty. She listened to the alien message, ran it through the translator, and understood. They were scared. They thought they would be turned away. Yuri opened a channel. She took a breath, smiled even though they couldn't see her, and spoke. Welcome. We've been hoping you'd come. Don't be afraid. You're among friends here. Tell us about your world. We'd love to hear your story. The transmission crackled. There was a long pause. Then a voice came back, small and shaking, but full of something that sounded very much like hope. You want to hear about us? Of course we do. That's why we're here. Somewhere on the coast of Korea, an old man sat on his porch, watching the sun go down over a quiet sea. He didn't know about the small ship on the edge of space, or the young officer who had just changed someone's world with a few kind words. But if he had known, he would have smiled, because that was the point. That had always been the point. The galaxy had once been a place of silence, the silence of the powerful ignoring the weak, the silence of fear, the silence of 1,000 species too afraid to speak. But now, slowly, one voice at a time, the silence was filling with something new. Not laughter. Not this time. Conversation. And the galaxy, for the first time in a very long while, was finally learning to listen.